Bon, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the third Infusion webinar. Today we have with us the Senior Manager of Private Client Services from EY, who specializes in business tax incentives. His name is Nassim Bennacer. I've known Nassim for quite a few years now. He's super passionate about startups and helping startups. He's been involved in many different organizations. And I think I'm gonna let him give a little intro about himself. So tell me about yourself, Nassim.
Yeah, so I think like you said, my name's I use Nas, so diminutive, but I used to work for a very small firm that was purchased by EY in 2011, with the idea of like PCS, private client services, really means entrepreneurship. So going to work with entrepreneurs, because EY had pivoted towards working with much larger organizations over the years. So since 2011, since that acquisition and then other smaller, accounting firm acquisitions, we've put together a very entrepreneurial type practice. So that's what I've been in, and that's allowed me to, sponsor and support different accelerators and incubators and university spin-offs. And bring my knowledge down, and then bring EY services down to the entrepreneur. So from anywhere from tax to audit to consulting. So it's been very successful because there's a lot of great businesses out there, and there's been a lot of, let's say, VC money in the ecosystem in the last 10 years. So a lot of startups have thrived. So that's it. I lead our entrepreneurial tax incentive practice, or like even tax incentive is very broad because there's also different types of grants and subsidies that are in there, and try to support industries, several different types of industries, anywhere from, clean tech to med tech to high tech to software to entertainment. So it's very vast. I support about 150 clients a year with my team in Montreal. And that's it. So we kind of prepared a presentation with some of the different programs, and we'll present that to you. And if you have questions, you'll have my coordinates. So I'm happy to sit, one-on-one after and do a digital coffee, virtual coffee, and then talk about your companies and where, some of the programs that we're talking about here might help. We'll share the presentation with you, and it's, there's a lot of information in there. I'm not going to cover it all. But yeah, if you need some guidance afterwards, I'm more than happy to jump on a call and chit chat about your companies and what you guys do.
Awesome. So while you're projecting your presentation, I'm just going to give a few, housekeeping instructions for the people that are attending. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to shoot it to us on the chat or on the Q&A section. I am going to give you access to your mic if you ask a question. So the more the merrier. Nas usually likes these presentations to be interactive. So, if you have a presentation, even in the middle if you have a question in the middle of the presentation, don't hesitate to shoot it to us. So Nassim, whenever you're ready, I think we're ready for you.
Get used to this format. Awesome. You guys see the presentation? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So, like Noor said, this is the first time I do this in this format, but normally there's not tons of material, and it does last longer because of the questions. So do ask questions, please. But ultimately, let's get going. So are you familiar with incentive programs? I'm assuming some of you have taken advantage of some of the programs, or not. And even if you have, there's a very wide list of them, and they tend to change with every budget and every government. So every year, this time of year normally, but April, March, we have provincial and federal budgets, which are usually packed with a bunch of different goodies. So it's that time of year where you want to be paying attention to when the budgets in your provinces, and the federal budget, which we didn't have this year yet, drop, to get an idea of some of the new programs. So a lot of the presentations about the Scientific Research and Experimental Development Program. And why is that? It's because it's one of the larger programs in Canada. With the different provincial programs, it represents about $4 billion that gets pumped into Canadian companies each year. So what's the scientific research and experimental development program? It was implemented to encourage and develop scientific research and development in Canada. It's to increase Canada's competitiveness in the global market, to encourage like economic growth, companies to grow, to create jobs. So who can benefit? So any company that has a permanent establishment in Canada. So you don't have to be a Canadian company. You can be a foreign subsidiary of a company here, and also take advantage of the program. So really high level being, you know, I think I didn't get from Noor which provinces you guys were from, but you know, the first program, the federal program is administered by the Canadian Revenue Agency. It's, you know, your claims will be reviewed by two people, so a financial reviewer and an RTA, who's pretty much a person with the, you know, a technological background pertinent to the field of your business. They usually have, you know, master or PhD level people doing this job. The credit rate is anywhere from 15% to 35%, and the costs, admissible costs associated to that are labor, materials, and subcontractors. In Quebec, the program is administered by Revenue Quebec, and we're talking about rates going from 14 to 30%. It's always refundable, unlike the federal, and I'll explain that. And admissible expenses are labor and contractors. Now, I believe there's companies from outside of Quebec, so there are also provincial equivalents in the Maritimes where the rates are 15%. We've got New Brunswick, Nova Scotia that have programs. Ontario has a program, the rate is 3.5 to 8%. Alberta canceled their program. BC has a program, which is also 15%. So you can see that Quebec is a very advantageous jurisdiction to be doing this. We're talking about a 30% rate at the enhanced level, and most, you know, startups or entrepreneur type companies will be able to qualify for that 30% rate. So it's double the highest, you know, the next highest province. So on top of that, in Quebec, being like probably one of the most friendly jurisdictions in Canada to do R&D, we've got Connect programs. So there's, you know, if you're working with universities, if you're working with research centers, or you're working with CTTs, there's enhanced credit. So the rate is the same, but ultimately you can qualify more of the expenditure that you would incur with those types of entities. So the idea for a business, and this is a slide taken from IRAP, but this is the idea of, you know, tax incentives and grants and assistance programs, right? So you start the business with an idea and your goal is to get to market. So along that route, you can, you essentially dress a roadmap of, you know, your product development or your project development and where different programs would fit. So like I said, every budget, new programs get money, you know, they get finite envelopes. As they spend those, you know, you'll be told, sorry, no more money in the program, come back next year. So this is an important activity to do, I would say, on a yearly basis, to always keep updated, and get as much as you can get, right? And like ultimately you can get stuff from like really early onset all the way to the markets, right? Like there's programs like Can Export and PEX here in Quebec, which will help you do business development abroad. And you can get pretty decent amounts from those programs. So can't talk about incentives without talking about COVID right now. So what I've done is I've put a few resources. The first one is a link from the startup community in Quebec. It's a spreadsheet of like non-dilutive financing. Then Bonjour Montréal has done a really good job at summarizing the different measures that have been put in place. And BDC same. So you have links to those resources and those PDFs. And then more importantly, the IAP was announced on last Friday. Applications opened yesterday, and it's pretty much a wage subsidy program run by IRAP. Application deadline is the 29th of April. And the reality is a lot of startups right now weren't qualifying for the 10% or the 75% wage subsidy that were previously announced. And so this program has been put in place, pretty much for everyone that doesn't meet the 75% wage subsidy. So read the documents, and I would encourage you to apply if you think you fit, and it's like the applications are, I think, going in very quickly because the site has been down a few times and I've tried to go on, but it can provide you some relief to survive this downturn. So I'll get back to that, but this is a jump page that you're going to use, and like we're going to really look at digital, media here with a bunch of different incentives to jump to. But I've also left stuff for a bunch of different industries because I know from talking to Noor originally, there was going to be different types of businesses within Zoo. So you'll get this presentation with all the links. So if I get back to SHRED, the definition of SHRED, there's 3 types of work that qualify, right? So there's basic research, applied research, and experimental development. So the first 2 is what you would really realistically find, within a university or a laboratory. 90% of the claims that are submitted are within the C-type work, which is experimental development, right? So the purpose of that is to develop or improve new, technologies, new processes, new material, new devices. It's very broad. The CRA gets most of their claims at this level. And to that, we add D work, which is support work, right? So engineering, design, operational research, mathematical analysis, computer programming, data collection, testing, and psychological research. So we call it support work or D work. It's because on its own, it's not considered to be R&D, but those activities tying back to, A, B, or C type work are admissible for the R&D program. So it's always important to be able to attach the support work that we do, that we need to, essentially advance anything back to the experimental development that we're doing. And then there's a list of excluded work. I won't read them, but they're there, so I don't think anyone's in prospecting, but that would be an excluded activity. So how do you identify projects, right? So this is one of the biggest challenges with the CRA, right? Most entrepreneurs have a business project. This is the idea. This is what I want to do. And that's what they end up presenting to the CRA. That's not what the auditors are looking for. They don't care about the ultimate outcome of your project, right? What they're looking for is an advancement of science or technology, right? And that's where most of the audits and most of the rejections of files come from. It's because we're framing a business project and not an actual technology project, right? And the reality is that the SHRED program encourages failure, right? So if you're able to solve cancer in a day, you'll get like 1 day's worth of R&D. Whereas if you take, multiple failures and iterations, well, they will support all that, right? At the end of the day, the end goal of your project could have been a complete failure and it would be admissible for the program. So you always have to think about that when you're drafting a project description that you're going to submit to the Canadian Revenue Agency. So 3 eligible criteria. So that's essentially what you're going to be looking at documenting, and that's what auditors are going to be looking at when they read a project description, right? So there's technological uncertainty, technological content, or technological advancements. And each one of those essentially equates a question that you have to answer on this form called the T661. Which is part of your tax returns, and that's how you claim SHRED. So what are we talking about, right? What's a technological uncertainty, right? It's essentially it's an obstacle in a product or process development, right? It's solution that's not readily available, not in the public knowledge. So what you have to do at the onset of your project is, what are the challenges, and you have to clearly describe that to the CRA, saying that, we have this project, we have these obstacles, we have these problems, we have these barriers, and, with everything, all the literature search that we've done, we can't get beyond it, right? So that's what would frame the technological uncertainty, and that would be the beginning of your project. So after that, they're looking for technological content. So they're looking for really a systematic approach to development, right? They're looking for you to use like kind of the scientific method. So I have a problem, I'm gonna have a hypothesis, I'm gonna do some development, I'm gonna test the results of that development, and then I've either, resolved the uncertainty, I have new uncertainties, or, and I cycle back through what's the next hypothesis, or I've resolved and then I've achieved an advancement, new knowledge gain, right? So, and that's how you ultimately, the systematic approach, like the 244 in the tax form, that's how you want to fill it out and illustrate it and use kind of a chronological approach to it. So say, I'm a fiscal year end December, so in January, this is what I did, or in the first quarter of the year, this is what I did, and answering those types of hypothesis, work done, analysis, results, and what happened. So from there, we go to technological advancement, which is box 246. So ultimately, all the work that you've done, we're really looking for some sort of advancement or new knowledge gain, or really like, even like ultimately like learning that these methods or these things that you've tried don't work, you've increased the knowledge base of your company. So that would all be admissible, and that's how you would document it. And that's how ultimately a project can end up being, several years. You're not framed in time. Like your project could end at the end of the year being like, I still don't know, I haven't resolved the original obstacles, and it would carry forward to the future. I've had clients that are working on projects for probably like 3-4 years. Sometimes I've had companies where they've abandoned the project, and then down the road they decide to revisit that project because today, there's new knowledge, there's new methods, they believe that they may be able to overcome that obstacle. So that's also very common, where you'll drop projects and then come back to them later on. So we talked about the 3 criterias, right? The uncertainty, the systematic, and the advancement, and they tie back into this concept of 5 questions. So ultimately, the history behind that is that the CRA cut a claim to 0. So they told the company, the claimant, that you're not admissible for the SHRED program, and he didn't agree. So he went to court, and the judge looked at the merit of the case using these 5 questions. And these 5 questions haven't changed the law in any way, shape, or form, haven't changed the way you apply for the program, but it's like the golden standard that the CRA uses to evaluate the merit of a file, right? So when you prepare a claim and you submit it to the Canadian Revenue Agency in your tax return, there's a few things that can happen. Your claim can, 1, get a FTCAS, which is a first-time claimant review. So it's the first time you've claimed for the program. They're going to accept your claim, but they're going to come and visit you. They're going to explain to you the program. They're going to see what your company is about. They're going to see the type of documentation and evidence that you're keeping, and they will produce kind of a report, a few-page report, giving you an idea of improvements and conclusions toward the science and the technology that you're developing. The claim can get a desk review, which is often like a request for information. So they would ask you for technical or financial information, and then you hand those in, they'll evaluate it. It's kind of a back and forth, but your file ultimately will get accepted as filed. Your claim can get, just let's call it fly under the radar, but be deemed low risk and not selected for audit. So it would get accepted, and that's it, that's done. You'll get your money. You can get a full-blown audit. So the full-blown audit is really where they will send you requests for info, they will come to the company, and they will scrutinize everything from a technology and from a financial point of view. And the technical auditor, this is where the 5 questions are going to come in. He's going to evaluate that report where you answered those 3 questions using these 5 questions and produce a report. And if he's not able to answer one of those questions, then your claim is at risk of getting adjustments or getting rejected. So if you're planning and if you think that you're admissible for SHRED, then I would print out this slide and keep it and make sure that my project description, whether you're preparing it yourself or working with a external contractor, that when you read the final product, the finished product, you are able to answer these 5 questions, right? So was there scientific or technological uncertainty that couldn't be removed with standard practice? Did the effort involve formulating hypothesis? So really, when we're talking about, you know, the work done, we're really looking at what was the hypothesis number 1, what was the work done, and then going into the scientific method, right? What was the adopted procedure consistent with the total discipline of the scientific methods? Hypothesis, work done, analysis of results, and then you cycle in or out of R&D. Did the process result in advancements? And the 5th question, what records were kept? So what documentation was kept? And like the documentation, I can't stress enough, it's really important. And I think we'll get to it later on, but you want to document, you know, materials, you want to document labor, you want to document the hours that the employees put onto this. And you're at the start of your company, so that the practices or the best practices you'll adopt today will stay with the company as it scales. Like if you're 2 and 3 and you're not documenting, well, then when you're 10, you're probably not going to be documenting anymore, right? So, but if you implement it early and you request it from your employees and you put in as, you know, best practices for your business that we have to document all that we do, then it kind of becomes second nature and it ends up happening, right? For audit, this is one of the biggest ones where files get rejected. And I can tell people year in, year out, like, yeah, it's accepted as filed, but it doesn't mean that you're answering all these questions properly. And when we get audited and there's no records, it's next to impossible to defend the file. So what's admissible for the program? Touched on it a little bit earlier, but labor, contractors, material, overhead, and third-party payments, so universities and research centers and whatnot. So labor, documentation. So labor, what do we want to keep? We want to keep timesheets. We want to keep hours assigned to the projects. We want to keep, you know, some sort of description of tasks. We want to keep a start and end date of those activities. So tools that you can implement, you know, our timesheet system, project management systems, so very important. Contractors, you know, too often what ends up happening as a subcontractor invoice is literally a 1-line item R&D project. There's no details. You know, you choose the contractors you work with. So, you know, request a detailed invoice, request, you know, that they annex timesheets, request that you put in place a contract, you know, define that the R&D belongs to you, the IP belongs to you, you control the work. Will make it, you know, at audit, will make it more, you know, clear to the auditor what the subcontractor was engaged to do, and that really the R&D belongs to you and not to the contractor. Same thing for materials. So identified to projects, kept until the claim is accepted. And if you can't keep, if you're building devices or, you know, prototypes or whatnot, well, at least document via photo and video the prototypes that you've built if you're going to scrap them. So this is a Quebec example again, but this is a very, you know, basic kind of rough calculation of eligible expenses, you know. So we're looking at, you know, with $100,000 of labor, 100% of the cost is admissible federally. Then you've got overhead. So overhead, if I explain that, you know, there's 2 ways to claim shred. There's one to take your actual overhead costs. It's tedious, it's time consuming, and it's more often than not not advantageous. Or there's the proxy method, which like ultimately the government will say, we're going to give you 55% of your salary base in the calculation to cover all your overhead costs. It's, you know, in 99% of the cases, more advantageous to go that route. Contractors are admissible 80%. So we take out 20%. Essentially it's the markup. Like the government's trying to get back to the actual cost of the contractor, not by removing that overhead, that profit margin. And materials, you know, are 100% admissible for the federal credit. On the Quebec side, it's 100% for the labor. There's no overhead. There's no overhead in the calculation. Contractors are at 50%, and materials are not admissible for the Quebec credit. The other provinces are harmonized with the federal program. So what the admissible expenses federally are what transfers to the provincial level. So Ontario, the Maritimes, BC are harmonized with the federal. And you'll also only file a federal claim. So you file it to the CRA and they determine the admissibility and they accept, and you get one check, one refund. In Quebec, again, we like to be different, but we will have a federal portion of the claim, and then we have a Quebec portion of the claim with Quebec tax forms that go to Revenue Quebec. Federal still administers the program, so they're the ones that are going to do audits, they're the ones that are going to decide if your claim is admissible. That decision will go to Revenue Quebec, and Revenue Quebec will then do a, 80% of the cases, they'll do a request for info for financial purposes. So was the labor paid? Were the contractors paid? Is it within the fiscal year that we're claiming? Were there any assistance? And they'll then issue out the payment. So a few scenarios, but very basic scenarios. But if you look, with 50,000, with 100, with 150 and 200,000, you can see how, again, Quebec purposes here, but the credit rate as your expenses scale can go from 50% refundable all the way to around 74 cents on the dollar refundable for labor. You'll notice at 50,000 in scenario A in Quebec, I have zero credit. So why is that? Well, a few years ago they implemented an excluded amount. So essentially in Quebec, your first $50,000 of R&D expenses aren't admissible for the R&D credit. So you can see that has a pretty significant impact in Quebec. And then in March 2019, there was a budget change. So they've kept the exclusion for R&D purposes, but have removed the exclusion for university contracts or research centers. So that's something that's advantageous there.
Nassim, we have a question from Kauthar.
Yeah, go ahead.
Kauthar, I'm going to give you the mic access. You can unmute yourself and ask your question. So her question is this applicable to any type of project? And she's not sure she's understanding the impact of the contractor.
Okay, so the scope of the program, of the R&D program, is very, very wide, right? At the end of the day, you need to see, the three criterias, which are is there a technological obstacle, right? Technological or scientific obstacle is probably number one to answer. If you can say yes to that, then did you approach a systematic, way to resolve it? And then what new knowledge was gained? It's the program is really great, let's be honest, right? So like it can be, it's very broad and it's very great. The best bet is to go to the CRA website, and they actually have a self-diagnostic tool. So it's a PDF that you'll download and you'll answer questions about your project, and it will give you a kind of a recommendation at the end saying, yeah, it's potentially admissible, or, no, this is not admissible. So you can kind of game it and play with your project as, as you're answering the questions to kind of see if it can fit within the program. But I would say, look, at the end of the day, you're going to invest some time in this, and most preparers for startups will actually charge you a contingent. So they're not actually going to charge you anything to do it. They're just going to take a cut of your, payout. So, people get upset if they get nothing, but I'm like, what did you really invest here, right? You did a few hours of work to potentially get 70 cents on the dollar back. Like, for me, when you're a pre-revenue company, it's worth the exercise. You know what I mean? So kind of do it. It's worth it. And the CRA, I'm being recorded, but the CRA gets a lot of friggin' claims, right? And the reality is that they don't have the capacity to audit a lot of these claims, right? They may audit maybe like 5 to 10% of the claims being filed on a yearly basis. So chances are you're going to fly under the radar. Your claim's going to get accepted as filed, and you get money out of it. And most of your competitors are doing it too. So best bet is read the documentation on the CRA, download the self-assessment tool, try it out, and then see if you're admissible or not. And if you want, we can really chat about your project, and it takes like 15, 20 minutes. We can talk about what you're doing, what it is, the challenges around it. And I can tell you, realistically, I think you should claim, or, you know, it's a risky claim, and you'll get an idea there. What was the second question? For contractors? So contractors, you know, so you can have employees, so labor, right? Your direct employees in the company, and that's always more advantageous. Or you can also, and often companies at the onset, right, they can't afford employees yet. So they're going to be working with contractors because they don't have to pay source deductions. They don't, you know what I mean? Like, you're pretty much paying the guy for a defined amount. And that's it, that's all. So the R&D credit, though, is less advantageous because of the whole grind down, right? So federally, you know, labor federally in Quebec, I'm taking 100%, or any of the provinces, I'm taking 100% of the cost for my company. Versus a contractor, I'm taking 80% of the cost, and in Quebec, I'm taking 50% of the cost. So that's where, you know, it's less advantageous to deal with a contractor than a, you know, physical employee of my firm. Does that kind of answer it?
Kata, does that answer your question? You can just type yes or no. Yes, thanks a lot. All right.
So in line with documentation, right? At the bottom of the form, of the T661 form, there's this section asking you to pretty much check the box of the documents that you have in your company. Biggest mistake I see is that people work with preparers, or they prepare quickly, or their accountant, and they'll just check every single one of these boxes. Bad idea, because when you get audited, or if you get a request for info, like a desk audit, they're going to ask you for a sample of these documents. Don't check the box if you don't have those documents, because it already leads to credibility issues, right? But inspire yourself from what is being asked in the T661 to put in place documentation process, right? So that ultimately you should ideally be able to check most of these boxes off. But if you're not able to say yes to any of these, well, start evaluating what you need to do. And that's probably the best recommendation, because an auditor will be forgiving to a first-time claimant. And especially if you file, like the process of a shred claim is that you file it at year end. So if you file it at year end and then you implement a documentation system in your business for the future years, chances are the auditor is coming to visit you, you know, like a few months after you've submitted your claim. So if by the time he gets there, you've already put in place timesheet system and, you know, documentation and contracts with suppliers, well, it gives a lot more credibility to the, you know, the previous claim, and the auditor is able to see, you know, a finite period, but at least see that you're doing an effort to document yourself. So that's a recommendation. Again, ideas and examples of documentation. So what's the T661 form? So this is ultimately it, right? So part of your tax return at year end, for the activities that you've done, you'll outline projects that, you know, your company worked on, and you have to answer these 3 questions. And as you can see, it's very limited, right? You have about 1,500 words to be able to describe what your project is. So often, you know, one company project may end up being split into several actual technological projects, right? So we may end up with one project, one company project might end up being like 2 or 3 different R&D projects that we would submit. And that's also a smart approach, because it's like not putting all your eggs in one basket, because they also often do sampling, right? So you submit 3 projects, they may only look at one of your projects that you've submitted, and the other 2 will be accepted as filed, right? So that's kind of a strategy. And I realized I didn't translate this slide, but ultimately it's what was in earlier slides, right? It's answering like the technological uncertainty, the scientific content, and then the advancement. So the timeline for a claim. So this credit, it's not a grant. So this credit, and the difference between a grant and a credit, it's very simple. Most tax credits are year-end activities. So I incur the cost during the year, and then at year-end with my tax return, I will file for the credit that I'm admissible to. So, you know, for, let's say, the creative type of industry, but R&D, e-business, multimedia would be type credits that you will file for after you've incurred the costs, and they go into your year-end tax return. So if I'm looking at a credit, I have my fiscal year end, my accountant prepares my tax return. For R&D purposes, for e-business purposes, and multimedia, actually, I have an 18-month deadline. So I have 15 months to go and get again, for e-business and multimedia. I have 15 months to go get my certificate from Invest Quebec, and then I have 18 months to get that certificate or my R&D claim into my tax return to be able to claim the credit. And then CRA would approve the credit, and then Revenue Quebec would get the federal decision and approve. So if you're diligent and you need money and you don't want to dilute, because this is like non-dilutive, you make sure you're working with your accountant. Like, I have my year end, I want to file my tax return within 1 or 2 months after year end, like close the books, let's get this done, prepare your R&D claim, put it in there. From the time of submission, it's usually around, like, delivery standards are 2 to 3 months for a claim submitted in original by the CRA. So you can realistically get money within like 3 months afterwards from the Canadian, and then a month after from Quebec. The 18-month deadline allows you to go back in time, right? So right now you have 18 months after the filing, after the year end, to file for R&D. So right now we are in April 2020. So you can go back all the way to year ends of October 2018. So October, that's all activities from November 2017 to October 2018, right? October 18 to October 19, that's 12 months. And then 6 months, that brings us to April 2020. So you can go back quite a bit in time to capture. So if you add activities and you didn't take advantage of this program, probably a good time to sit down and think about what you've done, and maybe put a claim together. So that's the R&D program. Those are my contacts that you can use to get a hold of me if you have more questions. And then now if we go back to specifics,
before we keep going, Arshita has a question for you regarding the application. So Arshita, go ahead.
Hey, hi Ben, hi Noor.
Hi.
Hi Nas, hi Noor, sorry. We've not had good experiences at ED Films with consultants coming in to help us with our tax credits. So we brought it all in-house because we have several tax credits that we're applying for. And so not that we're experts at tax credits, but we're experts for ourselves. So I'm just like wondering if you had any tips on getting a good consultant, because this is the first year, for example, we're doing multimedia tax credits in addition to the others. So I need a good consultant, but I've had so many bad experiences with the R&D ones and even with animation and production tax credits that I'm a little bit like wary, on how to find a good consultant to help.
Yeah, I look, again, at the end of the day, it's there's a lot of consultants out there, right? I think if you're looking at larger firms, let's just say, like your Big Four, and then your BDOs, your Richters, they have in place a quality system, let's be honest. And then they're usually very large teams, so that I think already there's a little bit more quality in what you'll obtain. I'm very wary of single preparers that have numbered companies that don't have, a physical presence anywhere. I'm wary of people that ask you for payment upfront. Those are all let's say red flags. I've seen countless people approach me and they're like, hey, I paid for this and now I'm getting audited and the person's not answering me. Well, I'm like, yeah. Or, people don't even have the support documents from the preparer when they're getting audited. So those are kind of red flags. I think after that, it's just asking for referrals, right? I often, when I'm doing business development, people will ask me for referrals. So I plug them in with existing clients in their industry, and they can chit chat about the experience. So I think that's probably, one of the safer bets. If you're getting someone for R&D or for production, or for any type of credit, what are your credentials? Because often people will say, yeah, but they have no experience doing it. So I think that's another one. Ask for referrals and then speak to some of his customers. And if they're wary to do that, well, I think that's a big, big red flag, right? So I think that would be what I recommend.
Thanks, Matt.
All right.
Good?
Yep.
So as you can see, lots of different incentives. We'll skip to digital media, and some of the more pertinent ones for your industry would be, Arshida, you mentioned it, but production of multimedia title. So PTM administered by Investissement Québec. I need to go and get a certificate from them. I can get an initial certificate and the production certificate. I can do, the initial to get an idea and then the final at year end, or I can do both at year end. But credit pays anywhere from 26.5 for vocational all the way to 37.5 for titles that have been translated to French. It's really it should be called the gaming credit. To be honest, it's really mainly for multimedia titles like game titles. There are exceptions for vocational type titles that will be admissible. It's a credit on labor, but it's a credit on labor.
Are you saying it might as well be called the gaming credit because a lot of gaming companies apply to it, or is it because okay?
Yeah, a lot of gaming companies apply to it, right? And you have to have a few elements, right? So it has to be sound, it has to be moving images, it has to be interactive. It's very hard to hit all those with vocational titles, for example, right? This is a perfect example of one where I've seen so many people be told that they qualify and then they have poor experiences and they've paid up front for it. Call Investissement Québec. They have, I don't remember her name, but she will come on site. She will talk to you about your company. She will talk to you about the project that you're doing. You can file for the initial certificate. It kind of de-risks the whole application process, right? So that's one of the realities there for that. But if you can qualify for this, it's a great program to get. Also PTM, PTM and e-business, well, they don't reduce your federal shred. So often there's ways to optimize where I will take my R&D federally and then I will take my, multimedia or e-business in Quebec on the Quebec portion, and I get kind of a bump up because those two credits aren't considered to be government assistance for the federal R&D credit. The other advantage of those credits, R&D, it's super great. I file for it and who knows if I'm going to get it or not, right? I may get audited. Production of multimedia titles and e-business, I do file for that certificate. So once I have that certificate for my company and my employees, well, it's a given that Revenue Quebec will give me my money, right? So I find it to be a de-risk. So often, a lot of first-time claimants, what we'll do is, we'll say, hey, yeah, we're claiming shred, but when we see admissibility for multimedia or for e-business, we'll also simultaneously file one of those claims. And then once we get our certificates from IQ, then we'll go and modify the shred, take out the provincial portion of the shred and add the e-business or the PTM, and then we end up getting a bump, right?
PTM,
Sorry, production of multimedia titles. So both of those credits are administered by Investissement Québec. They're the ones that issue out the certificates. And with those certificates, I turn around to Revenue Québec, who pays out the cash, and I get my money. So multimedia is really, I see it more as the development of multimedia titles, so really kind of gaming type businesses. And then e-business is the development of software solutions to change business processes. So that one, same thing there, administered by Investissement Québec, and we're only getting a year-end certificate on that. In that one, it's a 30% credit. It doesn't have the 50K grind down of the R&D provincial. There's a few tests. So there's two tests in reality, right? There's a revenue test. So you have to have revenue for this one. There's a 75% test and there's a 50% test, and they look at industry codes. So, and I'll add kind of a 2-pager walkthrough to see if you qualify. It's really simple. So you kind of see where your revenue is coming from, how do you break it under industry codes, and if you pass that test, then we look at the second test, which is employees, right? So you have to have a minimum of 6 admissible employees in the company to be able to qualify for the credit. There's a notion for startups that, the minute that you have 6 and you maintain 6 in the year, well, that portion of the year will become admissible. So you can also look at your org chart and see when you would have become 6 admissible employees. and go from there for the application. So same thing for e-business. You prepare the application, corporate, employee, Appendix A, which is the employees, your revenue, which ties back to your financial statements, which ties back to being a year-end activity because you have to have your financial statements to do this application. And then Appendix E, which are pretty much defining, you know, the role of an employee. So a software developer, like the different roles that you would have, that's submitted to Invest Quebec. Then they most often do a review. They often come for a first-time claimant to visit the company. But then when I have my certificate year in and year out, it's really updating for, you know, new employees or, you know, substitute employees, because they're looking at continuum, like roles, like people that, like that role was created and it's a continuation. So swap out for new hires for people that left. And I take my certificate and I get my credit. Other programs, you know, pertinent to this for you guys, you know, IRAP. So IRAP, administered by the NRC, you know, they can fund up to 80% of salaries, up to 50% of contractors. This is a grant, so you want to apply for it prior to the project commencing. So you contact IRAP, they will assign a industrial, I don't remember the name, but an industrial representative, you know, pertinent to your field. You discuss your project, you discuss the cost of the project, who the job, the employments would be. I can actually add a blank application. It's all applied via their website. And they're looking at both, you know, the innovation around the project, but also the economic benefit for Canada. So what, you know, how are your sales going to grow? How many jobs you're going to create? And they can fund you. And then essentially the beauty about them, it's since it's not a year-end activity, on a monthly basis, after you've signed your agreement, but on a monthly basis, as you would incur the costs, they will refund you on those costs. So it's great for cash flow, right? And they used to fund smaller projects, and then last year they kind of made a distinction between IRAP and SIF. So everything under 10 million will go through IRAP, and everything over 10 million is through SIF. So you can have fairly large IRAP projects now being presented. And then the Innovation Assistance Program that I mentioned earlier that opened yesterday, and applications are till the 29th, pretty much a wage subsidy. You have to demonstrate that you like pretty much don't have the, you know, financial muscle to weather the storm. But it's essentially an employment assistance. So it's being also managed by IRAP. And then CMF, so Canadian Media Fund, has a innovation, like experimental stream. So same thing there, like long application process, but the payouts can be fairly significant for those projects. I believe the application is actually open now until mid-May. So it's the time to go and look at that. And yeah, there's just like, it's considered government assistance. So anything you'll get from there, like, although they're forgivable loans, the whole notion of a forgivable loan is that if you don't repay it, it's considered assistance. So this one would impact your R&D credit, would impact, you know, different tax credits that you would go and get. So you'd have to take that into consideration. But, you know, if you think realistically that you will repay in future years, well, then I would encourage you to file for the credits you're entitled to, because most credits have a notion of, I paid for it, I got assistance for it, but if I repay that aid in future years, then I'm entitled to that credit from prior years, right? But if you don't file because you're like, oh, I get FMC, well, or CMF, sorry, then you wouldn't be entitled to the credits down the road, even though you would have repaid that aid. So that's kind of how they function together. Innovation, this one's pretty good too, like Soutien Innovation, it just reopened. It's the MESI that administers it. And you can get, you know, pretty significant amounts from them. So I would encourage you to go read the website and see if you can qualify, because that one, same thing, like applications are going in very quickly, and then they tend to run out of cash very quickly. But I think last year we filed, you know, around 5 of them, and 2 of our clients were able to get money, and the other ones were like, thank you, we have your application, come in and revisit us. And now that it reopened, they're like, oh, we changed the forms, update your forms and file again. So that is it. So I've left tons of programs in there. If you're working with universities, if you're thinking of hiring, university grads, you can go see MyTac. There's internship credits. There's really a lot of credits out there. This is kind of a starting point. And then if you want to chat more, my email's in there. So I'm happy to take, half an hour to an hour and sit down and talk about your different, specific companies, because it's hard depending on what we're doing and the activities in your business to actually try to frame which programs I can qualify for. But I think that's the idea around it.
Any
you guys have questions
of the attendees? You've got 10 minutes to ask away. So I have a question. The IRAP. So how much can you ask for? I mean, up to 10 million. What is the up to 10 million? Is it the how much you're spending? Like how can you go?
Yeah. So the way IRAP works, it's really like you've got to frame it on employment. So existing employees or new employees that you're going to hire in the firm, right? Or contractors that you would need to develop that project, right? And then as you frame it and they agree to the like whatever, let's say program, your project is going to be $1 million. You sign the agreement with them, and then as you incur those costs, they will refund you up to 80% of the salary that you've incurred. So they look at, they really look at innovation, but they look a lot at, the economic windfall for Canada. And then they also look at the company's ability to survive and repay. So you can't go I'd say you can't. Back in the day, you couldn't go with them if you were a startup and you had no money in the bank and no nothing. They'd be like, there's no, well, one, you don't have the means to pay for this project, right? And so they kind of looked at that. Let's say they've gone more like liberal with that approach, because I've seen several startups, and we've helped start several startups with not very much in the bank, go and get, their first 50,000 or their first 150,000 of IRAP, which go back 3-4 years, IRAP would have been like, no, not interested, next, So I think that's part of the Liberals. They had bumped up IRAP's budget, the NRC's budget, quite a bit in the last few years. So they've looked at, more, let's say, I would call them riskier businesses to give cash. So if you're doing something innovative and you think there's going to be a good windfall, then I encourage you to contact IRAP and have the discussion with them, and just be prepared for when they come, right? Like, what's the project? What's it going to cost? Who do I need to hire? What are the economic windfalls? And also be open, because IRAP has a bunch of free resources. You need articles, you need reports that cost like a lot of money. Well, they can actually, your IRAP advisor can get them for you, because they have pretty much they have access to like all the libraries. If you don't know, like for certain experts, they can connect you with the researchers at universities. Like their assistance is wider than just cash, right? And I find my clients that have developed like good relationships with IRAP, and like they're managers are calling them being like, hey, do you need more money? Do you want to apply? They're the ones that are kind of like, even at the beginning, they were like very open to the whole IRAP, NRC ecosystem, and not just like, I'm looking for money.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We have a question from Hugues Léger. Hugues, you're live.
Yes, you can hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, IRAP is a fantastic program at the stage we're into right now. We're looking to hire quite shortly. I was wondering, what's the timeline for IRAP repayment to cover salaries? Is it quarterly? Is it semester, yearly? What's the time frame?
For what, sir? To repay IRAP?
Well, to get the money.
Oh, to get the money. So IRAP, this is how IRAP typically works, right? And like this year, let's just put a star because everything's a little bit different. But yep. IRAP typically works with the federal government's fiscal year, right? So the federal government, like their year is like April 1st. So April 1st, usually based on on the budget in March, they would get their new pocket of money, anywhere from $250 to like $750 million, right? Yep. So that's the opening, the floodgate. So IRAP will be looking at prior year projects that they didn't fund, and will be looking at new applications. So you want to get in your application in early spring to get in there, right? And then they will analyze projects, and usually by end of summer, beginning of fall, they've given away, they've assigned the money that they had for the year to the different projects. They've signed agreements with them, right? So that's kind of like timeline for applying. Now, if you don't get money, still stay in contact because they'll revisit you in future years, right? Especially if they were interested in the project. If they tell you, hey, like, this is great, but we have no money. So stay within like their ecosystem, let's say. Now, how to get the money, it's really like, it's on a monthly basis. So once you've signed an agreement, like you will incur X amount of salary that month. You will prepare your IRAP report. This is like an activity report, kind of like, this is what we did. This is who worked on it. This is the entitlement to the grant, and then you would get the refund, you know, the following month. So it's an ongoing basis. So that's why I say it's great for cash flow, because unlike most of the tax credits, you file at year end and then you have to wait for your cash. This one's really throughout the year, it's refunding you. I have clients that do it, you know, 4 times a year. I have some that do it every month because the costs are significant enough so that they file every month to get their refund.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I have one last question about Investissement Québec. So how do you get the certificate? Is it just contacting someone who will come evaluate you?
Yeah, so
what is the process?
I wish. So for Investissement Québec, like for e-business and multimedia, there's an application form that you have to fill out. They're Excel documents. So you would download them from, like, if you go, and I'm not sharing my web browser, but if you go to the e-business, just go to e-business, but if you go visit their website, you'll find the application form. So you fill out the application form along with the supporting documentation and you submit that to them. And then, you know, and it's all done via the web. So you submit it to them either via email or you upload the documents, and then they'll assign it to a reviewer. The reviewer will more than likely contact you, look at, you know, the file, ask questions, and then you'll get a blue paper, which is like your certificates. And then you take those papers and you turn around to Revenue Quebec, and that's how you get those credits. So for like, one administers the eligibility and issues out the certificates. The other one administers the cash payment of the credit. The other thing that I didn't mention with Investissement Québec, if you're getting any of these tax credits, or, you know, they can also finance your tax credits. So if, you know, you want working, you know, cash flow, you can go to them and they'll finance often 2 years. So the past year and the current year, and they can pay those out on a quarterly basis. And IQ will either finance them themselves, or they'll give you a loan guarantee that you can turn around and go to your bank, and then your bank would, you know, essentially issue out a loan. So that's also another, you know, good approach. It costs a few %, but e-business, multimedia, Shred, they're all financeable, and you can get loan guarantees from IQ. So that's another option to get more, you know, capital in your business.
Fantastic. The last question is, when do you think you'll be able to send us those slides?
Yeah, I'll send them right after. I'll add you the 2-pager, and I will send you the deck. And like, bear in mind, it's not perfect. And I know we talked about companies from outside of Quebec, but e-business and multimedia, like if you have employees here, actually even Shred, like the R&D program, Quebec's actually one of the only provinces that you don't have to have a permanent establishment to qualify for the credit. So if you were to, you know, deal with contractors in Quebec and you're above the exclusion, like the 50,000, well, you can actually qualify for the R&D credit on those amounts. So something to keep in mind. And also, like, I mean, it's probably one of the most advantageous jurisdictions in Canada and in North America for credits. So it's definitely worth exploring, you know, having an establishment here in Quebec. And I mean, the popular, you know, thing right now is a lot of US companies are coming to set up, you know, software development businesses to take advantage of the business, or like, as you know, like gaming studios. Like Quebec is probably the second largest hub in the world. It's because of these tax credits, right? They're so advantageous. So it's something to definitely keep in mind in your, you know, in your expansion plans.
Awesome. On that note, thank you so much for taking the time this morning, Nassim.
No
I
problem.
hope you enjoyed the experience of your first webinar.
Yeah, different.
Yeah, I'll call you later to get some feedback.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. And my coordinates are in there, so don't hesitate to write me if you want to chat more. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Have a good day.
Bye, you too.